This story is titled, You're Not Coming. Somebody has to stay to take care of Grandma's dog. My mom smiled while handing my vacation to my golden brother. So I just nodded and took my revenge. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey, I need to vent about some family BS that went down last week. Long post ahead. So, I, 28 male, have always been the responsible one in my family. You probably know the type. The kid who always does their homework, never gets in trouble, and somehow ends up being the family's free tech support, therapist, and personal assistant all rolled into one. Yeah, that's me, Ethan, the human Swiss Army knife. My younger brother, Liam, 26 male, is the total opposite. This dude has literally never had to face consequences for anything in his life. He failed most of his classes in high school. He's just not being challenged properly. Got fired from his third job in a row for not showing up. That manager had it out for him. He's been living in my parents' basement for the last 6 years, playing video games and finding himself, whatever the hell that means. Meanwhile, I busted my ass through college, got a decent job as a software developer, have my own apartment, and somehow still get treated like I'm the family butler. Need someone to fix the Wi-Fi? Call Ethan. Car broke down at 2 a.m.? Ethan will come get you. Need money for bills because you blew your paycheck on some dumb stuff? Ethan has savings. The only person who ever noticed this messed up dynamic was my grandma, Margaret. She's my mom's mom and has been loaded ever since Grandpa's insurance business took off in the 90s. She's always been super supportive of me and would constantly ask about my job and my life when I visited, while everyone else just wanted to talk about whatever new drama Liam had going on. My parents owned this nice house, a couple of fancy SUVs, and somehow managed to retire early at 58, always bragging about their hard work paying off. It never made sense to me, considering they weren't exactly pulling in big salaries when I was growing up, but they strutted around like self-made millionaires, and everyone just bought into it. Anyway, last year, I decided I wanted to do something really nice for my parents. My parents have always talked about wanting to see Paris. My mom's been obsessed with it since she was a teenager, had French posters all over her wall growing up. According to Grandma and Dad, always promised to take her there for their 25th anniversary, but they couldn't afford it back then, even though Grandma probably would have paid if they asked. So I started putting away money every month. I even picked up some freelance coding gigs on weekends to build up the cash faster. After about 8 months, I had saved up enough to book a family trip through a travel agency. It was a pretty sweet package deal. Flights for 3 people, 2 weeks at a nice hotel near the center of Paris, some guided tours of all the famous spots. The whole deal cost me just over $6,000. Which was a lot for me, but I was genuinely excited to do something special for my family. I specifically didn't include Liam in the planning. I wanted this to be a special trip for me and my parents, without having to deal with Liam's usual BS showing up late for tours, complaining about everything, spending the whole time on his phone. Plus, I was paying for it, and I didn't feel like dropping another $2,000 on someone who has never shown me any appreciation for anything. When I told my parents about it at dinner one night, my mom actually started crying and hugged me for, 5 minutes straight. Dad kept saying how proud he was of me and how thoughtful it was. They seemed genuinely touched and excited about the trip. They didn't even mention Liam not being included, which surprised me but also made me think they understood this was supposed to be about the 3 of us. Everything was all set. The trip was scheduled for mid-June. About 6 months after I surprised them with it. I had to negotiate pretty hard with my boss to get 2 weeks off because we had a big project launching around then, but I explained it was a family thing I'd been planning for a while, and he was cool about it. My mom kept bringing it up in every conversation we had. I can't believe we're actually going to see the Eiffel Tower. Do you think we'll have time to visit Versailles? I'm practicing ordering food in French. It was actually nice to see her so excited about something I'd done for once, instead of just talking about Liam's potential. The trip was booked as a family package, which meant all 3 names were on one reservation. I was the primary account holder since I paid for it all, but the tickets were printed with each of our names. I made sure everyone had valid passports and reminded them about it constantly in the months leading up to the trip. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, I was at my apartment packing and getting everything ready. I'd taken the day off work to prepare and was feeling pretty good about everything. Then my phone rang. It was my mom. She told me that Grandma Margaret had taken a bad fall at home and was in the hospital. Nothing super serious, she didn't break any bones or anything, but she'd hit her head, and they wanted to keep her for observation for a couple of days. Before going to the hospital, she dropped her dog, Daisy, this spoiled little Yorkie. She treats like a human child, at my parents' house, expecting to pick her up later that day. So, we might need to delay the trip, I said, already mentally calculating if I could move everything back a couple of weeks. I didn't want to lose all that money, but family emergencies happen, right? Oh no, that's not necessary, my mom said in this weird, high-pitched voice she uses when she's about to say something she knows I won't like. We've actually figured out a solution. That solution turned out to be me staying behind to take care of Grandma's dog while the rest of them Mom, Dad, and, surprisingly, Liam still went to Paris instead of me. I literally couldn't speak for like 30 seconds. They were really going to go on the vacation I paid for while I stayed home to dog sit, and they were taking Liam instead of me? Liam wasn't even supposed to be going in the first place. Mom, I paid for the trip, I finally managed to say. I've been planning this for months. And why is Liam suddenly going? We know, sweetie, and we're so grateful. But Liam doesn't have any work responsibilities, and you do. It just makes more sense this way. Plus, Daisy knows you better. That was complete BS. Daisy barely tolerated me and barked every time I came near her. The only person she kind of liked besides Grandma was actually my dad. We've already called the travel agency and had them swap Liam's name for yours on the booking, my dad added from somewhere in the background. They said it was no problem since it's a family package. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had already swapped my name for Liam's with the travel agency without even asking me, like I was just some NPC in their lives that didn't have feelings or plans or $6,000 invested in this trip. Mom, I've been planning this for almost a year, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I took time off work. I researched everything. I paid for all of it. I know, honey, and we really appreciate it, she said in that condescending voice she uses. But Grandma Margaret needs someone to take care of Daisy, and you're so good with responsibilities. Liam just isn't. Well, you know how he is. Yeah, I know exactly how he is. Completely useless and somehow rewarded for it constantly. Daisy could go to a kennel, I suggested. Or a dog sitter. There are apps for that now. Oh, Grandma would never allow Daisy to stay with strangers, Mom gasped, like I'd suggested throwing the dog into traffic. You know how she feels about that dog. Daisy is family. Apparently, I wasn't family, though just the wallet and the dog sitter. My dad got on the phone next. Son, we know this isn't ideal, but your brother really needs this trip. He's been so depressed lately, and this could really turn things around for him. Depressed? Right, because he spends all day playing video games, sleeping until noon, and contributing nothing to society. Crazy how that might make someone feel bad about themselves. And what about me? I asked. I've been working 60-hour weeks for months to pay for this trip. I needed this break too. You're stronger than Liam, Dad said. Like that was supposed to make me feel better. You've always been able to handle disappointment better. And don't worry, we'll bring you back something nice from Paris. a souvenir as a replacement for my dream vacation. It was honestly laughable. "We're going to come by tomorrow to pick up the tickets and itinerary," Dad said, like it was all settled. "And Liam needs your carry-on suitcase. His is too small for 2 weeks of clothes." They wanted my suitcase too. I hung up without really saying goodbye. I just couldn't process what had happened. I sat on my couch staring at nothing for like an hour, just trying to make sense of it all. This was beyond their usual favoritism. This was straight up theft. I checked my email and found the notification from the travel agency. "Update to your booking. Passenger name change from Ethan Carter to Liam Carter completed successfully." They'd really done it, just swapped me out like I was interchangeable. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the preparation I'd done for this trip. The French phrase book I'd bought, the walking tours I'd mapped out, the restaurant reservations I'd made, all of it now being handed to Liam, who wouldn't appreciate any of it and would probably spend half the trip in the hotel room playing on his Switch. Around 3:00 a.m., I opened the trip folder on my laptop and looked at all the details again, the flights, the hotel confirmation, the tour bookings. Everything was through Horizon Travel, and I was listed as the primary account holder, even after the name swap. And that's when I realized that I still had control over the booking. I could just cancel the whole thing. The thought came to me suddenly, and once it was there, I couldn't shake it. Would I really do that? Though waste all that money just to prove a point? I'd lose most of what I paid since it was so close to the departure date. But then I thought about them enjoying my trip without me taking selfies at the Eiffel Tower, eating at the restaurants I'd researched, sleeping in the hotel room I paid for, all while I was stuck at home with Daisy, the demon Yorkie. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I decided to sleep on it. Maybe I'd feel differently in the morning. I didn't. If anything, I woke up even more pissed. I got a text from Liam around 8:00 a.m. "Yo, bro, can I borrow your travel adapter? Also, do you have any euros? Dad says we should bring some cash. He was really going to take my trip and ask to borrow money for it." The audacity of this dude was unreal. I didn't answer him. Instead, I called my boss and told him there had been a change of plans and I could work on the project launch after all. He sounded relieved, but asked if everything was okay with my family trip. "There is no family trip," I said. "At least not for me." After I hung up, I sat with my coffee and thought things through one more time. If I canceled the trip, I'd lose about $3,000. That was a lot of money. But if I didn't, I'd essentially be giving Liam a free $6 vacation while I got nothing. Plus, I'd be reinforcing the same pattern that had defined our entire lives. Ethan, the responsible one who sacrifices, so Liam, the golden child, can benefit. Not this time. I called my grandma at the hospital. The nurse put me through to her room. "Ethan, is that you?" Grandma sounded tired but alert. "Yeah, it's me, Grandma. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," she said with a small laugh. "But I'll survive. The doctors say I can probably go home in a week. Just need to take it easy for a while." "How are you? Excited about your trip?" So, she didn't know. Interesting. "Actually, Grandma, there's been a change of plans. Mom and Dad decided that I should stay home to take care of Daisy while they take Liam to Paris instead." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "They did what?" Her voice was suddenly about 10 times more energetic. "Yeah, they called the travel agency yesterday and had them swap my name for Liam's on all the bookings. Said you specifically wanted me to look after Daisy because you trust me more." "That is absolutely not true," Grandma said, sounding furious. "I told your mother that Daisy could stay at Happy Paws. I have an account there, and they know exactly how to take care of her. Your mother said it would be no trouble to look after her at their house. I never asked for you to stay behind." I wasn't surprised. My mom had lied to manipulate me again. "I can't believe they would do this to you," Grandma continued. "After you paid for the whole trip? This is unconscionable. Hearing her validate my feelings made something break loose inside me. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt justified in my anger. I'm thinking about canceling the whole trip, I admitted to her. I know it's petty, but I just can't stand the thought of them enjoying this vacation that I worked so hard for. Grandma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what? Do it! It's your money, your trip. If they don't respect that, why should they get to benefit from it?" That was all the permission I needed. "I love you, Grandma," I said. "I'll come visit you tomorrow, okay?" "I'd like that," she said. "And, Ethan, it's time you stop letting them walk all over you. You deserve better than that." After we hung up, I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and navigated to the Horizon Travel website. I logged into my account, found our booking, clicked the cancel reservation button, and I did it. I actually canceled the entire trip. I sat there staring at the confirmation screen for a good 5 minutes, half expecting to feel guilty or regretful. But nope, I just felt free, like I'd finally broken some invisible chain that had been weighing me down my whole life. The email from Horizon Travel came through almost immediately. "Your cancellation has been processed. A refund of $845.33 will be credited to your account in 7 to 10 business days." Less than half of what I'd paid, but honestly worth every penny just to know my family wouldn't be enjoying Paris on my dime. I didn't tell them right away. I wanted them to find out at the airport, right at that moment when they thought they were about to start their dream European vacation. Maybe that makes me petty, but after years of being the family doormat, I was done. Instead of sitting around waiting for the fallout, I decided to go visit Grandma Margaret at the hospital. I figured someone should actually be checking on her since my parents were obviously more concerned with stealing my vacation than their own mother's health. When I got to the hospital, Grandma was sitting up in bed, watching some game show. She looked smaller somehow, with a nasty bruise on her forehead, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. She immediately asked if I'd gone through with the cancellation, and when I nodded, she actually gave me a thumbs up. She has always been the only one who sees through my parents' BS. She told me stories about how my mom was always pulling the same kind of stunts, with her sister growing up taking credit for other people's work, manipulating situations to get her way, playing the victim when called out. Apparently, this kind of behavior runs deep. Then she started talking about money. She told me she'd been supporting my parents financially for years, like serious money, $4 a month, every single month for almost a decade. Their house, their cars, their early retirement, all of it was basically funded by Grandma. They weren't successful. They were just really good at spending someone else's money. I'd known they were getting some help from her recently, but I had no idea the support was on this scale or that it had been going on for so long. I was kind of shocked, but also not really. It explained a lot about my parents' lifestyle that never quite added up, how they could afford such a nice house when Dad's business had been just about to take off for 15 years, how they always had new cars, how they could support Liam's endless basement dwelling with no complaints about money. While we were talking, my phone started blowing up. Mom, Dad, and Liam were clearly at the airport because all of a sudden, I was getting bombarded with texts and calls. I ignored all of them. Grandma saw my phone lighting up and just smirked. After about 20 minutes, I decided to check the messages. They were exactly what you'd expect. Mom was freaking out about how there was some problem with the tickets, and the airline was saying everything had been canceled. Dad was demanding, "Fix this immediately," like I was their personal it guy dealing with a router issue. I waited another 30 minutes before responding, just to let them really stew in it. I wanted them to fully experience the panic and confusion of having their plans completely derailed, just like they'd done to me. Then I sent a group text explaining that yes, I had canceled the entire trip that morning. Since I wasn't welcome on the vacation I paid for, I decided no one needed to go. And, of course, the most pathetic part of the whole fiasco, Liam's reaction. Instead of being pissed, he was more annoyed that he'd actually showered, gotten dressed, and dragged his ass out of the basement for nothing. When he finally texted me later, all he said was, "Bro, seriously? You couldn't just suck it up and let me have this one thing? You're always so uptight about everything. Thanks a lot." Yeah, because clearly I was the one being selfish here. Unbelievable! I only saw his text before turning my phone off and spent another hour with Grandma. She told me she was thinking about making some adjustments to her financial arrangements with my parents. She asked if I could swing by her house to pick up her checkbook, and reading glasses said she needed to revise some things. I didn't think too much about it at the time, just agreed to help her out. That night, I gathered all the stuff I'd bought for the Paris trip, my travel adapter, the phrase book, the walking shoes I'd broken in, and packed it away in the closet. Maybe someday I'd go to Paris on my own terms, with people who actually appreciated me. I looked at my phone one last time before going to bed. My dad had sent a final message saying this wasn't over and that they'd be coming by my apartment tomorrow to sort this out. I turned off my phone completely and got the best night's sleep I'd had in months. The next morning, I went to Grandma Margaret's house to pick up the things she'd asked for. Her place is this nice ranch-style home in a fancy part of town, way nicer than my apartment. While I was in her study looking for her checkbook, I noticed some papers on her desk. Financial statements showing the regular transfers to my parents' account. It was even more money than she'd mentioned, and seeing it in black and white made me realize just how dependent my parents were on her. I found what Grandma needed and headed back to the hospital. I was just pulling into the parking lot when my dad's car screeched to a stop right next to me. He literally followed me to the hospital. I don't even know how he knew I would be there, but there he was, stomping across the parking lot towards me with that look on his face, the one that used to scare me as a kid, but now just made me tired. I grabbed Grandma's stuff from my car and walked into the hospital without waiting for him. He followed me all the way to the elevator, ranting the whole time about how I'd humiliated them at the airport. Apparently, they'd stood at the check-in counter for almost an hour while the airline employees tried to find their reservation before finally telling them everything had been canceled. They'd missed their flight, obviously, and since they couldn't afford to book new tickets on the spot, they'd had to turn around and go home with their packed suitcases. Dad kept saying how devastated Mom was, how she'd cried the whole way home, and how Liam was talking about how I'd always been jealous of him. Classic Liam, always the victim. The whole time Dad was talking, I just kept walking, not responding. I could tell it was driving him nuts that I wasn't engaging. But honestly, what was there to say? They tried to steal my vacation and got caught. Simple as that. When we got to Grandma's room, Dad actually had the nerve to paste on a fake smile, like everything was fine. Grandma wasn't fooled for a second. She took one look at him and asked what he was doing there, since he was supposed to be on a plane to Paris. The look on his face was priceless. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my grandmother absolutely destroy my father. She tore into him about how they'd treated me, about how they'd lied to her about the dog-sitting situation, about how they always favored Liam and took me for granted. She went all the way back to when I was in high school, and they missed my graduation ceremony to attend one of Liam's baseball games he wasn't even playing. He was benched the whole season. Dad tried to defend himself at first, saying they'd made a family decision about the Paris trip. That made the most sense for everyone. Grandma asked how it could possibly be a family decision when the person who paid for the trip wasn't consulted. "You know what your problem is, James?" Grandma's voice was icy, her eyes locked on my dad with the kind of intensity that could shatter glass. "You and your wife raised a spoiled brat and a saint, and you're punishing the wrong one for making something of himself. You've been so busy shielding Liam from the real world that you've crippled him. And when Ethan tries to build something meaningful for himself, you snatch it away to hand it to your golden child like it's nothing." Dad lost it and started stuttering something, but Grandma cut him off with a raised hand. "No, I'm not done. You've been living off my money for years. pretending you built this perfect life, while your real accomplishment has been turning your own son into a doormat. But not anymore. Ethan deserves better, and you're going to learn real fast what life is like when the free ride comes to an end. The whole scene was surreal. I'd never seen anyone stand up to my dad like that before. And I certainly never expected it to be my 78-year-old grandmother doing it from a hospital bed. But there she was, calling him out on decades of favoritism and manipulative behavior. Eventually, a nurse came in and said Grandma needed to rest. Dad looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. He tried to get me to come with him, saying we needed to talk, but I told him I was staying with Grandma for a while. He left, looking absolutely defeated. After he was gone, Grandma and I had a long talk about the whole situation. She told me she'd been watching how my parents treated me versus Liam for years and had tried to say something several times, but my mom would always get defensive and stop talking to her for weeks after. So, Grandma had backed off, not wanting to lose touch with her grandkids. But this Paris trip thing was the last straw for her. She said she was done enabling my parents' lifestyle and Liam's laziness. That's when she showed me the letter she'd drafted to my parents, informing them that their monthly stipend was being terminated immediately. I was honestly shocked. I knew they'd been getting some money from Grandma recently, but seeing the actual numbers was something else. $4. A month on a regular basis for years, and they still had the nerve to act like they'd made it on their own. No wonder they felt so entitled to my money. They'd been living off someone else's for ages. I asked if she was sure about this, and she said absolutely. She was tired of watching her money being used to create a spoiled, entitled grandson in Liam, while her hard-working grandson me was constantly taken advantage of. After I left the hospital, I went back to my apartment and found my mom waiting outside my door. She looked like hell-puffy eyes, messy hair, still wearing the clothes she'd planned to travel in. I nearly turned around and left, but figured I might as well get this over with. As soon as she saw me, she started going on about how heartbroken she was that I would do something so cruel to my own family. How could I embarrass them like that at the airport? I just stood there, keys in hand, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally took a breath, I asked her if she was done. That seemed to throw her off. She asked if I had anything to say for myself. Yeah, actually, I told her. I told her that for my entire life, I'd been the reliable one, the one who did what was expected, the one who helped out without being asked while Liam got away with doing absolutely nothing. And the one time I did something special for myself and my family, they decided I wasn't important enough to be included. Mom tried to interrupt, but I wasn't having it. I told her they didn't even have the decency to discuss it with me before calling the travel agency. They just assumed I'd be fine with it because I'd always gone along with everything before. Well, not this time. She started crying again, saying they'd only been trying to do what was best for everyone, that Liam needed the boost to his self-esteem, and I was always so capable of handling disappointment that they knew I would understand because I wasn't the strong one. I told her being the strong one didn't mean I was okay with being treated like crap. Being reliable didn't mean I was okay with being taken for granted. And being successful on my own didn't mean I deserved less consideration than my unemployed brother. Mom switched tactics then, saying if I was really so upset about missing the trip, they could try to reschedule it for later in the year, and I could come too. We could make it a 5-person trip, me, them, Liam, and even Grandma if she was feeling better by then. I almost laughed. They still didn't get it. I told her it was too late for that. They'd shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities, and I'd adjusted my behavior accordingly. She said I was being dramatic, that families have misunderstandings all the time, but they work through them because that's what families do. I asked her if she'd ever considered that maybe our family didn't work like a normal family. Should that maybe the way they treated me and Liam wasn't healthy or fair? I unlocked my door and told her I needed some space, that I wasn't ready to just pretend everything was fine. She tried to follow me inside, saying we needed to fix this before Dad came back, but I blocked the doorway. I told her there was nothing to fix right now, I needed time. So, it's been about 2 weeks since the whole Paris trip disaster, and things have gotten pretty wild. Grandma Margaret was discharged from the hospital 3 days after that confrontation with Dad. The doctor said she was recovering well but needed to take it easy for a while. I offered to let her stay at my place since she lives alone and probably shouldn't be climbing stairs or doing too much around the house yet. She actually took me up on it, which surprised me. Grandma's always been fiercely independent, but I think she wanted to avoid my parents for a while too. So now she's sleeping in my spare bedroom office, and honestly, it's been kind of nice having her around. She's pretty chill for an old lady. The day after Grandma moved in with me, she had me drive her to her bank. She was in there for almost an hour while I waited in the car. When she came out, she looked so satisfied, like she'd just accomplished something major. She told me she'd officially stopped all automatic transfers to my parents' account and had changed some other financial arrangements. I didn't ask for details, but she seemed pretty happy about it. Meanwhile, my parents have been losing their minds, and since I blocked their numbers, they started emailing me nonstop. I didn't respond. About a week after the trip fiasco, I got a call from my uncle, Tom, Dad's brother. He said my parents were freaking out because Grandma wasn't answering their calls and they'd gone by her house, but she wasn't there. They were talking about filing a missing person report, which was ridiculous because she was literally just staying at my place. I told Tom that Grandma was fine and staying with me while she recovered from her fall. He seemed relieved but also confused about why nobody had told my parents. I explained the whole Paris trip situation to him, and to his credit, he was totally on my side. He said he'd always thought my parents favored Liam too much, but it wasn't his place to say anything. He promised to let my parents know Grandma was safe but wouldn't tell them where she was staying if we didn't want him to. The next day, my mom showed up at my apartment again. She looked totally frazzled, like she hadn't slept in days. When I opened the door, she tried to rush past me to get inside, but I blocked her way. I wasn't letting her ambush Grandma, who was still recovering. Mom kept saying she needed to speak to her mother urgently about a financial matter. I told her Grandma didn't want to see them right now and was resting. Mom's face got all red and blotchy, like it does when she's about to throw a tantrum. She demanded to know what lies Grandma had been telling me about them. I just laughed. I told her Grandma hadn't needed to tell me anything. I'd figured out years ago that they favored Liam over me. The difference was that now I was done accepting it. Mom started crying again and saying I was tearing the family apart over one little misunderstanding about a vacation. I told her she needed to leave, and if she showed up unannounced again, I wouldn't open the door. She looked shocked, like she couldn't believe I was setting an actual boundary. She left eventually, but not before saying that Dad wanted to talk to me man to resolve this. I closed the door without responding. After a couple of weeks, my family went silent. I was surprised that Dad didn't push harder. Around that time, I got an email from Liam first time he'd reached out directly, instead of just being copied on Mom and Dad's messages. It was pretty much what I expected. How I'd ruined everything. How Mom was crying all the time. How Dad was stressed out about money. But there was something else too, a note of panic I hadn't heard from him before. He wrote that Dad had told him he needed to find a job within the month or start paying rent, that they were putting the house on the market and moving to a smaller place, that they couldn't afford to support him anymore. It was happening, they were finally facing reality, after decades of living beyond their means on Grandma's dime, and Liam was finally being told he needed to grow up and support himself. The email ended with Liam asking if he could crash at my place for a while if things got bad at home. The absolute nerve of this guy. After everything that had happened, he still thought he could use me as his backup plan. I didn't respond. I showed the email to Grandma though, and she just nodded, like this was exactly what she expected to happen. That night, I felt weirdly lighter, like some heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had been lifted. My family was a mess, yes, but for once, I wasn't the one trying to clean it up. For once, they were facing the consequences of their own actions without me rushing in to fix everything. And it felt really, really good. I'm currently planning a solo trip to Tokyo for next spring, no family, no drama, just me exploring a city I've always wanted to visit. I might invite Grandma Margaret to come if she's feeling up to it, but she says she's more of a European traveler and doesn't want to fly that long. And, of course, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor, Liam's still blowing up my phone every couple of days. His texts are like a broken record at this point. Yo, bro, can I stay with you for a bit? Things are bad here. You know how mom and dad get when they're stressed. Bro, come on, just a couple of weeks. I'll crash on the couch. I swear I'll get a job this time. Dude, stop ignoring me. Seriously, you're being I finally replied today. Just one sentence. Karma's a bitch, huh? No response yet, but I'm not holding my breath. I get that some people might think I overreacted over one incident, but it wasn't just the trip. It was years of being the reliable son who never got the same consideration his lazy brother did. It was watching my parents favor Liam over and over while taking me for granted. The Paris thing was just the final straw. I don't know if my relationship with my parents will ever be repaired. Maybe someday, if they can genuinely understand what they did wrong and apologize without excuses. But I'm not holding my breath. In the meantime, I'm focusing on my own life for once, building my career, spending time with people who actually value me, planning trips that no one can take away from me. And it feels pretty damn good. Maybe the biggest lesson in all this is that sometimes you have to let go of the people who don't appreciate you, even if they're family, especially if they're family. Because if the people who are supposed to love you the most treat you the worst, what's even the point?